The birth narratives of Jesus and the accounts of his early childhood that we read in the Gospels may have been plagiarized from an account of an even greater Messiah that preceded Jesus almost 600 years before. Though this great Messiah, Cyrus the Great, lived almost 600 years before Jesus of Nazareth, the account that I refer to was written circa 425 BCE. This account from which this plagiarization comes was written about 500 years before the gospel authors wrote what they did. Take a look. In Matthew chapter 1 verse 20, we read that there were prophetic dreams about Jesus' coming. Also in Herodotus' Histories, book 1 verses 107 through 108, we find that there were prophetic dreams about the coming of the great Messiah, Cyrus. In Matthew chapter 2 verses 1 through 2, we read that Magi from the east came to inform the ruling king at the time that a Messiah was coming. Also in Herodotus' Histories, we see in book 1 verse 108 that Magi came to the ruling king to inform him of the coming of Cyrus the Christ. Precious treasures were given to both infant messiahs. In Matthew chapter 2 verse 11 we read this, and also in Herodotus' Histories, book 1 verse 111. In Matthew chapter 2 verses 3 through 7 we read that the ruling king at the time tried to kill Jesus. This same story was written about Cyrus the Christ about 500 years before the gospel account was written about Jesus. In Herodotus' Histories, book 1 verse 108. In Matthew chapter 2 verses 42 through 50, we see that Jesus left his parents to be engaged in his purpose in life. This was written already about a greater Messiah in Herodotus' Histories, book 1 114 through 116. Jesus was crucified in Matthew 27 verses 32 through 58 and its parallels. Coincidentally, we also see this detail in the history of Cyrus the Christ in a different record, the Library of History by Diodorus Siculus, book 2, chapter 44, verse 2. These similarities in the infant narratives, the early childhood narratives, and the ultimate ends of these messiahs are striking, and we need to account for them. What is the answer? Why are these accounts between both messiahs so similar? Now, do I claim that the gospel authors had Diodorus Siculus and Herodotus works at their table as they were writing the gospels, and they plagiarized these works directly? No, I don't claim that because we don't know that for sure. I don't think we have the degree of confidence necessary to make that claim. What I do claim is there are multiple elements found throughout the ancient literary corpus used as devices to fulfill a certain purpose of the author. Can we say for certain that these things did not happen to each of these messiahs? No, we can't say for certain that none of these things happened. We weren't there. What we have are texts. And in these texts, what we see are these common elements. In the Gospels, these elements apparently are used to emphasize the power of Jesus, to emphasize his great role, insomuch that the ruling king was scared of him and wanted to kill him. These same elements were used in the history of Cyrus the Christ, a greater Messiah, in my opinion, that preceded Jesus, and were also used to emphasize his greatness. These messiahs were so great that people had prophetic dreams about them. Precious treasures were given to them. Gold, they were adorned with precious jewelry and gold. Magi, these knowledgeable and authoritative mystics told the ruling king these messiahs were coming, emphasizing their power and the portrayal that even early on these people were destined for greatness. Cyrus engaged in his calling early on, pretending to be a king with his playmates, Jesus preaching in the temple in his early adolescence. So I'll take for granted that you are already familiar with these details in the Gospels. You know that there were prophetic dreams about his coming, and I gave you those verses already. I'll read to you these details in Herodotus, so you are familiar with them. The infant narrative and the details about his early childhood are largely found, like I said, in book 1 verses 107 through 116. So I'll go ahead and read those for you. Again, this is Herodotus' Histories, book 1. Verse 107 begins, "After this, Cyaxares died, having reigned 40 years, including those years during which the Scythians had rule. And Astyages, son of Cyaxares, received from him the kingdom. To him was born a daughter, whom he named Mandani. And in his sleep it seemed to him that there passed from her so much water as to fill his city, and also to flood the whole of Asia. This dream he delivered over to the Magian interpreters of dreams, And when he heard from them the truth, at each point he became afraid. And afterwards, when this Mandani was of an age to have a husband, he did not give her in marriage to any one of the Medes, who were his peers, because he feared the vision. But he gave her to a Persian named Cambyses, whom he found to be of good descent and of quiet disposition, counting him to be in station much below a Mede of middle rank. And when Mandani was married to Cambyses, in the first year, Astyages saw another vision. It seemed to him that from the womb of this daughter a vine grew, and this vine overspread the whole of Asia. Having seen this vision and delivered it to the interpreters of dreams, he sent for his daughter, being then with child, to come from the land of the Persians. And when she had come, he kept watch over her, desiring to destroy that which should be born of her. This would be Cyrus the Christ. For the Magian interpreters of dreams signified to him that the offspring of his daughter should be king in his room. So there we see Astyages the king was afraid of this coming Messiah, Cyrus. Astyages, then desiring to guard against this, when Cyrus was born, called Harpagos, a man who was of kin near him, and whom he trusted above all the other Medes, and had made him manager of all his affairs. And to him he said as follows, Neglect not by any means, Harpagos, the matter which I shall lay upon thee to do, and beware lest thou set me aside, and choosing the advantage of others instead, bring thyself afterwards to destruction. Take the child, which Mandani bore, and carry it to thy house, and slay it, and afterwards bury it, in whatsoever manner thou thyself desirest. To this he made answer, O king, never yet in any past time didst thou concern in me an offense against thee, and I keep watch over myself also with a view to the time that comes after, that I may not commit any error towards thee. If it is indeed thy pleasure that this should be so done, my service at least must be fitly rendered. So in those verses we saw the prophetic dreams had about Cyrus's coming, that the Magi informed Astyages, the ruling king, that Cyrus would be king in his room, and that the king assigned to Harpagos the duty to kill the baby once it was delivered. So I'm going to skip to verse 111 where precious treasures are given to the infant Cyrus. But between verse 108 and 111, Harpagos couldn't do what the king Astyages told him to do, so he tried to pawn it off on one of the herdsmen of the king and said, take Cyrus and just leave him out in the wilderness. And so midway through verse 111, we read that this herdsman of Astyages was speaking with his wife, and he said, Wife, when I came to the city, I saw and heard that which I would I had not seen, and which I should wish had never chanced to those whom we serve. For the house of Harpagos was all full of mourning, and I, being astonished thereat, went within. And as soon as I entered, I saw laid out to view an infant child gasping for breath and screaming. This was Cyrus the infant, which was adorned with gold ornaments and embroidered clothing. So there we see soon after Cyrus was born, he was adorned with gold and expensive clothing. And then after Cyrus's life was spared via these servants of the king Astyages, he grows up, and during his early adolescence he's playing with his friends. Verse 114, And when the boy was 10 years old, it happened with regard to him as follows, and this made him known. He was playing in the village in which were stalls for oxen. He was playing there, I say, with other boys of his age in the road. And the boys in their play chose as their king the one who was called the son of the herdsman, Cyrus. And he set some of them to build palaces and others to be spearmen of his guard. And one of them, no doubt, he appointed to be the eye of the king. And to one he gave the office of bearing the messages, appointing a work for each one severally. Now one of those boys who was playing with the rest, the son of Artembares, a man of repute among the Medes, did not do that which Cyrus appointed him to do. Therefore Cyrus bade the other boys seize him hand and foot, and when they obeyed his command, he dealt with the boy very roughly, scourging him. So there we see Cyrus taking upon him that mantle of king very seriously in his play here. He is portrayed as fulfilling his purpose in life, which was to be king, the great King Cyrus. And I won't read to you word for word what we do find in Diodorus Siculus's Library of Histories, which just has a brief detail that Cyrus was crucified. But it is there, Book 2, Chapter 44, verse 2. I don't put a lot of stock into this historical detail, really, in any of these historical details that we find in either the Gospels or in Herodotus's Histories or Library of Histories by Diodorus Siculus. These things were written in antiquity. They were positioned in the text for a specific purpose, likely as a literary device to fulfill these purposes of the author. We can't take for granted all these ancient details as historically accurate. This is one of the largest errors of Christians today. They read these Gospels as historically accurate records of antiquity that tell us exactly what happened. That's not the case, simply. Largely, the work of historians is to read ancient texts and other texts and try to understand what probably happened. It's not just reading an account and taking that for granted as what happened. To take an ancient account, read it, assume everything in the text is completely historically accurate, and put a lot of weight on those details in the text is not only naive and perhaps foolish, but it cannot be done consistently throughout all of the ancient literary corpus without running into significant problems. Christians tout this superiority of ancient literature, and they say that we can rely on these ancient texts in many, if not all, ways. But if you take their methods and apply it to all other ancient texts, you would have to believe not only in Jesus as a deity, but also all the Egyptian gods as deities, all of the Hindu gods as deities, all other gods that we see in ancient literature. You would also have to take those ancient accounts for granted as historically accurate, which simply cannot be done.